Welcome to Cablesfarm. Today, this is the first of my post-corona videos. We're going to be talking about a pair of little pistols, or rather two little pistols, that I purchased recently. These are overcoat-sized pistols and 20 bore, rather nice condition, and by William Palmer. So we're going to look at the history of these. Now, there's a pair of them. Well, two. We'll come to the pair business in a minute. Quite good condition. They look perfectly clean and unmessed about. Right, now, these pistols, evidently from the look of them, date from the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century. And we're going to be concerned here with the origin of these pistols. Now, these pistols actually represent part of the early history of the police force. We're talking here about London, particularly, because that's where it all kicked off. Now, 17th, coming into the 18th century, was a pretty lawless time around cities, not a particularly peaceful place to be. The law enforcement, such as it was rather weak, although the punishments were incredibly harsh, usually hanging. But the enforcement was fairly weak, mostly by the watch, and the watch were rather ancient gentlemen who walked around the streets at night with a stick and a lantern. So they were the kind of the basic old-fashioned way of doing the policing. Now, around about the end of the 18th century, people began to think a little bit about what they could do and whether you could establish some form of formal, what we would now call police force. There was some opposition to this on the grounds that it was felt that too much kind of state control was a bad thing, and that it was best left to individuals and individual organisations to sort it out. But in general, it was thought that we needed to move to some kind of peacekeeping, or rather, crime suppressing force, and that was put into law in 1792 in an Act for the Effectual Administration of the Office of a Justice of the Peace. And so that established 7 offices around London, which had 3 justices of the peace each, and a total of 60 officers. And they were armed with truncheons and or tipstaffs. Now, that was the first of the sort of formal offices that became the police force. Now, in the early days, they were known as public offices. They didn't start being called police officers for some years. For a couple of years later, they were called public or police officers, and then they became known as police officers. But anyway, our 7 offices were set up, and amongst them was one at Bow Street. And in 1793, that's a year later, Bow Street had a night patrol of 68 men, which were, and with two conductors, and they were armed with the captain. The captain of the patrol had a carbine, and each of the patrols had 2 pistols and a cutlass. Now, those pistols, I think I've got one somewhere. Those pistols those pistols were probably of the box lock type. So they were basically quite simple little pocket pistols with a screwed barrel. And that's believed to be, they would in general have had their particular place of origin, as Bow Street or whatever, engraved on the barrel. And they would have been issued. Now they would have been made. The offices had the right to buy whatever from wherever they wanted, and most of them bought from a William Parker. So quite a lot of these little pistols would have been made by William Parker. This isn't one of them. This is an ordinary one made by retailed by Henry Knock, but Parker would have made those for them. So we're up to 1793, and we've got a patrol going. In 1795, we know that the Bow Street office set up a horse patrol, which had 52 patrolmen and 2 conductors, and they were mounted, and their job was to look after the roads into and out of London. So they were effectively the force that was designed to suppress highwaymen. So that's what they were doing. At the same time, they set up a foot patrol in the daytime, a daytime foot patrol of 30 men, and a nighttime patrol of 100 men. So it was quite a big force. And then there was a very curiously named patrol called the Dismounted Horse Patrol. And that's a puzzle, really, because how you can be a horse patrol and dismounted at the same time is a paradox. Anyway, they were afoot. They patrolled on foot, and they supposedly supplied relief riders for the horse patrol. The horse patrol and the dismounted horse patrol had a rather smart uniform, so they were quite easily distinguished. Now, my little pistols are late. We'll have a look at them in detail soon, but they are quite late. They could have been made in the 1790s, quite possible, but they're really quite near the end of the flintlock era. Now, the only reference we've got to the design of any pistol is in the book which contains most of the information about this, which is a book by Frederick Wilkinson, if you can see it, called Those Entrusted with Arms. It's a very interesting book, and it's still available second-hand at a reasonable price. So if you're interested, it's worth a read. And he says that he quotes a reference in 1822, which is quite late, to pistols of overcoat size with hexagonal barrels and the number of the troop engraved on the bow of the trigger guard. So that's the reference to pistols that look like that. Now, that's there is another. There's another reference in his book, which you might be able to see there, and that has a picture of a pistol that's identical to mine. And this pistol has on the bow of the trigger guard engraved Dismounted Horse Patrol 13/12.1794. So that implies that these pistols were similar to the ones that were issued to the Dismounted Horse Patrol in whenever that was set up. So that's a bit of a puzzle, because we're not sure when the dismounted horse patrol was set up. Anyway, now what we're going to do is to have a look in detail at these pistols and see what we can see from an examination of them. So if you'd like to move around and look over my shoulder, we can have a look and see how the what the pistols are like. Right, now we can have a look in detail at these little pistols. So there's a nice two of them. You would call them a pair, except that the numbers on the trigger guards are not consecutive. So we've got number 3 and number 16. So that rather spoils them for being a pair. But let's have a look at them. Okay, so what's characteristic of them? They're about 20 bore. They've got mostly a sort of semi-hexagonal barrel. I wouldn't say they were hexagonal. They are flat on the top anyway. The mark they've got, they're a overcoat pistol size. They're quite handy. With a 20 bore ball in there, you'd certainly stop somebody. They have a captive ramrod, so they can be loaded from horseback or on the go. You don't have to sort of have your equipment laid out to do that. Right, so what have we got here? We've got a late, very late style cock of the sort of semi-French pattern. It's characterized by the loop here and by the fact that the stop, instead of being the back of the cock against the edge of the lock, is now the chin of the cock against the edge of the flash guard. So that's the stop for the cock. It's got, if you can see it, it's got a rainproof pan. So a nice small rainproof pan. It's got a roller on the frizzen spring. So those are all really quite late features. Certainly put it after 1790, but probably really quite late on into the end of the flintlocks. So there's the maker's name engraved on it, W. Parker, and on the rib it's got Maker to His Majesty Holborn. So that's that. Now the giveaway for the police thing is that on the right side of the barrel is engraved Bow Street. I don't know whether you can actually see that, but there's quite clearly Bow Street on there. I might do some zooms on there and put close up on it. So there's Bow Street on that side, and on this side, quite clear, oops, it's up the other way actually, we've got Public Office. So this was early because after about 1795 they started to call them police offices. So that would seem to indicate that these pistols date from really from not too long after the Act for the effectual administration of the offices of Justice of the Peace. So there we are. On the trigger guard, as I've said before, there is the patrol number. There are, on both trigger guards, actually quite interestingly, there's a little series of dings across the trigger guard here. Whether you can actually see that, but there's a series of little dings across there where obviously it rested against something, possibly bounced up and down against something. So that's a possible clue as to how they were stored. Now these pistols are in really very good nick. The locks and things are not corroded. They've not been extensively cleaned as far as I can tell. The barrels are original. They've not been either cleaned or re-engraved. Of course, you can't. I mean, a clever faker can probably beat me, but I'm fairly experienced at that, and I would say that they were completely genuine. The brasswork, the engraving on there is nice. It's in keeping with the style that would have been used. The condition is good. There's not a lot of damage on the woodwork or anywhere, so it's difficult to see how somebody could have essentially taken these pistols out and bumped them around on a horse and used them on a patrol very often. So my guess would be that these were kept in the office at Bow Street for issue in situations that needed a pistol. So there we are. That's an interesting thing. Now, these pistols are quite rare. The highest number I think that I've seen is the one on the dismounted horse pistol in Wilkinson's book, which is 45. I think there may be a 65 out there, but really these pistols were probably what you're seeing now is what's left of maybe 100 pistols at the time or something. So they're really quite rare, and in this condition they're probably very rare. Okay, so if you want to see more on these pistols, you can go to cablesfarm.co.uk, where you'll see some more detailed pictures of them. Thank you very much.